Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. This is the post-fight review for Daniel Dubois, Trevor Bryan. Bryan stopped in the fourth round by a massive left hook. Daniel Dubois claims the WBA secondary world title in a performance which he was cool, calm and collected, and from the outset of the fight was in control. And it was a sort of surprising fight in some respects that Trevor Bryan, who has a decent jab, just barely threw it. But it was also surprising for the fact that he didn't really seem to be, at least in the first 2.5 rounds or so, too worried about what was coming at him, even though he was getting clipped pretty much, throughout these rounds. He was riding a lot of shots too. He was slipping some shots, but he was also getting caught. But you had, towards the end of that third round, Daniel Dubois clips him, backs him up to the ropes. It was a right hand that sort of shook him up, and Daniel Dubois was in there for the kill. Couldn't get him out of there at the end of the round, but this was sort of foreshadowed what was to come. Trevor Bryan stopped in the fourth round. A big left hook drops him to the canvas, and he tries to beat the count. Tries to get up, and he sort of collapses back down. The referee, seen enough, waves it off. Daniel Dubois is the WBA world champion, as it were. So this is a secondary title. The super champion is Alexander Usyk. And I said heading into this one that this was a good learning and development fight for Daniel Dubois. And I know it sounds weird saying that, but it was. You had the recent fights with Bogdan Dinu, Joe Kusumanu after the Joe Joyce loss, and they were a step below this. Trevor Bryan, and if you followed this channel for any length of time, I've sort of said he's around about top 30. He hasn't done enough to prove that he's any more than that, and I think that's about what we saw in this fight. He had a good chin, he took quite a few shots, he was quite durable, but ultimately the weight of Daniel Dubois' punches caught up with him, and eventually he ate one that really basically rendered him unable to continue. If that had continued, if he somehow got off the canvas, it would have been all over shortly afterwards. But Daniel Dubois was, from the outset, in control. And what I found really strange, especially in the first round, was Trevor Bryan basically not doing anything. Didn't really throw many shots at all. He was just having a look, letting Daniel Dubois throw jabs, and he was barely throwing anything back. Better second round for Bryan, obviously landing a few shots, jabs. There was the odd cuffing shot, but ultimately he really wasn't in this fight, and that was by his choice. Maybe the strategy was to try to take Daniel Dubois deep and drown him, but obviously if you're fighting at your opponent's pace and he's the one landing the shots, he's the heavier puncher out of the two, and he's the one catching up with you more than him, then obviously that's not a good recipe for success, and ultimately it proved so. Daniel Dubois, over the course of those 4 rounds, breaks him down and stops him. So you had Trevor Bryan in the lead up to this fight talking all sorts of mad trash talk, and it's backfired spectacularly. And unfortunately, I guess, for Daniel Dubois, because Trevor Bryan is such a lightly regarded name among fans, because he's been either inactive or fighting guys that people didn't want to see him fighting and that people didn't rate. I don't know how much credit people will give Daniel Dubois for this win, and that's a shame, because this was a step higher than where he's been fighting. You saw from some of the skills that Trevor Bryan had in there, he was able to box and move, he was able to evade some shots, but ultimately it wasn't good enough. But it was a better opponent than some of the fodder that Dubois recently had. So it's a good win for Daniel Dubois, and I'm putting him into my top 20 on the back of that. I do think that Bryan is somewhere around, top 25 to top 35, somewhere in that bracket, and it was a win that he should be getting the credit for. Fans should go, okay, good performance, you look relaxed, you look like you're developing. And in the true sense of the word, it was a learning and development fight. It was one of those ones, and it's weird to say that given there was a belt of some description, the WBA world title, as it were, inverted commas, on the line there, but Daniel Dubois has passed this test. So after the fight, he said that Trevor's O had to go. He said he was very happy, he'd worked so hard for this, and he's hoping to make some massive fights now. Shane McGuigan, his trainer, he came up to the mic when he was asked and said they want Dillian Whyte next. They want a fight back in the UK. They want a big name, and Dillian Whyte's name was mentioned. Not so sure that's going to happen. Daniel Dubois on a long-term contract with Frank Warren at BT. Dillian Whyte probably chasing other fights that are going to net him some bigger money. And obviously, if Dillian Whyte is a bit susceptible to a few different punches, I mean, I would think that Dillian Whyte against a big power puncher like Dubois is probably not going to want that fight, given it's not going to sort of get bang for buck for him. But I don't mind that fight. I just don't think it's going to happen. But Daniel Dubois does need, I think now, a step up from where he's been fighting. What that is, that's unclear. He's on a little bit of an island with Frank Warren, there's Joe Joyce in that stable. You've got a few other guys sort of on the periphery that are sort of either co-promoted, but I don't think those fights are realistic, aka Zan Kosobutsky or Peter Milas. I wouldn't mind seeing those fights, but I'm just not so sure they'll happen. Perhaps we will, now that Joe Joyce is not going to be fighting Joseph Parker, with Joseph Parker signing to Boxer and Sky, more likely Parker's fighting Dillian Whyte. Maybe it's time for Joe Joyce versus Daniel Dubois too. That could be something that happens. I wouldn't mind it, but I do think that Daniel Dubois is probably 1 or 2 fights shy of being ready for that rematch. 24 years old, still learning, still developing. I think, 1 or 2 more, that's not unfair, and probably before he's ready. And McGuigan, who he's only worked with, for a year or so now, probably needs a little bit more time and seasoning for Dubois, who's not even really into his prime at this point. Good performance from Dubois, and you might be wondering, why is there nothing from the fight here? Well, I've been burnt before by Don King and co, striking videos where it mentions anything to do with his fighters, so not prepared to show anything on screen from the fight. That is why I'll actually put in the comment as well, so you may have already seen that. Anyway, we'll wrap this up. Daniel Dubois beats Trevor Bryan comfortably in the end, stops him inside 4 rounds. Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.